Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us to this webinar titled Lebanon Between Two Tracks. We're going to examine the Lebanon-Israel framework and talk about the US-Iran understanding and try to understand their implications for Lebanon's sovereignty and security. Lebanon has entered a new and potentially decisive phase following the signing of a US-mediated framework between Lebanon and Israel in Washington. The agreement establishes a process intended to end hostilities, restore Lebanese state authority, facilitate reconstruction and the return of displaced communities, and provide for a phased Israeli redeployment. Its proposed implementation begins in designated pilot zones, where the Lebanese armed forces would assume control and dismantle Hezbollah's military infrastructure under a US facilitated coordination mechanism, subsequently allowing for Israeli redeployment. This agreement marks a significant development in the trajectory of the Lebanese-Israeli negotiations. Yet, it leaves fundamental questions unresolved, particularly regarding sequencing, implementation, guarantees, and the duration and scope of Israel's military presence, as well as the Lebanese state's ability to enforce its commitments. Continued Israeli military operations, Hezbollah's rejection of the framework, and growing opposition on behalf of certain political groups further raise the risk that implementation could deepen internal divisions rather than consolidate state authority. These developments are unfolding alongside a second diplomatic track, the fragile US-Iran understanding. That framework could either help contain regional escalation and create conditions conducive to implementing the Lebanon-Israel agreement, or it could preserve Lebanon's role as an arena of regional bargaining, enable Iran to retain Hezbollah as a source of leverage, or even produce understandings that conflict with the commitments undertaken by the Lebanese state. Lebanon therefore finds itself not simply between two parallel diplomatic initiatives, but potentially between two competing approaches to its political and security future. One is formally negotiated by the Lebanese state and links Israeli withdrawal and reconstruction to the restoration of state authority and Hezbollah's disarmament. The other is shaped by negotiations between Washington and Tehran, in which Lebanon and Hezbollah form part of a broader regional equation. Can the Lebanon-Israel framework provide a viable pathway toward the restoration of Lebanese sovereignty, or will disputes over sequencing and enforcement prevent its implementation? Can the Lebanese state fulfill its commitments without provoking domestic confrontation? And will the US-Iran track support Lebanon's sovereign decisions or subordinate them to Iran's calculations and wider regional bargains? With us today are three distinguished speakers who will help us answer these questions by assessing the newly signed framework, examining its relationship with the US-Iran understanding, and exploring the implications for Lebanon's sovereignty, security, and state-building agenda. With me today are Ambassador David Satterfield, former US Ambassador to Turkey and US Special Envoy for the Middle East. Thank you for joining us. Joseph Bahout, Director of the Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs and Associate Professor of Political Studies at the American University of Beirut. Thank you, Drew, for being with us. And Lina Khatib, Associate Fellow, Middle East and North Africa Program, Chatham House. Happy to have you, Lina. So we will start, the session will be structured as follows. We will have a discussion for 1 hour, moderated by myself, and then we will open the room for Q&A by the participants. We'll start with you, Ambassador Satterfield. To start at a high level, how do you think that the Lebanon-Israel track and the US-Iran track affect each other, particularly in terms of impact on Lebanon? How do you read the interaction and the impact on Lebanon in that regard?
There is a fundamental intrinsic linkage between the two tracks. In many ways, the mere existence of the MOU, the security annex that have just been agreed to, are a product not of a Lebanon first or Lebanon focus, but rather of the Iran focus. The president is determined to try to find a way out of the very significant morass that the ill-considered launching of the campaign against Iran has produced with respect to the Strait of Hormuz. In that, Israeli actions in Lebanon both have complicated, prior to the agreement, the MOU between Iran and the United States, reaching an agreement there, the president has had to focus on Lebanon. So has Iran. Iran has extremely artfully now instrumentalized yet again, or rather increased its instrumentalization of Lebanon as a means not of achieving a Lebanon-specific goal, but rather to use as pressure in negotiations over what is now for Iran the fundamental goal of any outcome to this conflict in the Gulf, which is a de facto or de jure acknowledgement of Iranian control over the Strait of Hormuz. This is not about the nuclear issue anymore. It is all about the Strait. That is the product of this campaign. Lebanon, unfortunately, has become drawn in to this. Now, that's the difficult part of all of this, the greater instrumentalization of Lebanon for a goal outside of Lebanon's own interests. However, let's look at the positive side here. The extraordinary opening of the MOU that was just agreed to between Israel, Lebanon, and the United States contains affirmations of points that I would have believed are absolutely fundamental to the launching of any means of achieving a potential resolution here. Acknowledgement that there is no longer a state of belligerency, effectively a declaration that the state of war since 48 doesn't exist, a commitment to a process to produce an enduring, comprehensive peace, full respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Lebanon. All of that is very good. And unlike the May 17, 1983 agreement, which was coerced by an occupying Israeli army and a U.S. administration that believed Israel could indeed dictate the political outcome of Lebanon in the face of Syria, I believe that set of statements, end of belligerency, recognition of Israel as a de facto matter, proceeding toward a process of peacemaking, I think that's genuine. I think the government of President Aoun wants to see that done. That's quite different from the Amin Gemayel situation in 1983, 1984. The problem here is, while in 1983, Syria blocked implementation, as well as lack of regional support, internal Lebanese divisions over the May 17 agreement, this time it is Iran through Hezbollah, which is the blocking force. And I must say here, I see very little potential here for any real-world execution or implementation of what we understand to be the provisions of the Security Annex. The Lebanese state does not possess the physical means to disarm Hezbollah, full stop. An attempt to do so will immediately fracture the LAF, which will lose its multi-sectarian, multi-confessional character. It could precipitate the kinds of events that we witnessed in 2008 with the seizure of West Beirut. It can't be done. Second point, Israel cannot, by kinetic means, coerce either the government of Lebanon or Hezbollah to effectively disarm. The most realistic outcome possible here is a focus on the Litani, the south, the small corner of the Litani to the east, which goes beyond the river's margins, and try to make that the focus of the agreement, as well as the goals that will trigger Israeli withdrawal. So long as Israel remains positioned in South Lebanon, Hezbollah is strengthened, the government of Lebanon is weakened. And I'll make a final comment here, because I think it could be said in 1983, in 1984 or 5, in 1996, when I negotiated the end of the Grapes of Wrath campaign, and it's true now. The best that Israel can hope for is a government like this government of Lebanon, which tries, with as much support from Lebanese as possible, to work towards peaceful goals, understanding that Hezbollah remains the dominant security force. What do? You isolate Hezbollah. You deny it legitimacy. And you deny it legitimacy by eliminating the pretext of occupation, the pretext of resistance. Israel right now, under the government of Prime Minister Netanyahu, is helping Hezbollah, not hurting it.
Thank you, Ambassador Satterfield. Joe, we'll move to you also along the same lines. I mean, what are the key differences for you between the US-Iran framework and the Lebanon-Israel framework with regards to Lebanon specifically? We've seen a lot of analysis over the past 2 days trying to actually put the two agreements together and try to analyze the differences in terms of their impact on Lebanon. What, in your opinion, are these differences?
First of all, thank you very much, Diana, and thank you to KI for putting up this webinar. I'm very honored to be with Ambassador Satterfield and pleased to be a good friend with a good friend like Lina and you, of course. Maybe I'll paraphrase sometimes what Ambassador Satterfield said, and I think that, I mean, of course, it's tempting to oppose the two texts. It could be also tempting to say they complement each other, but I think it's important to understand the broader context and probably also let's say the recent historical track that led to each one of them. If we accept the premise, but I think that the premise is extremely solid, that the Iran war, let's say the ceasefire that put an end, at least for now, because I think the war with Iran is not yet over. But if we accept the premise that the ceasefire between Iran and Israel was perceived widely, internationally, in the US, in Israel, and in the Arab world and elsewhere as, at least, if not a victory to Iran, but at least let's say, a setback for the US, and I think Ambassador Satterfield said it. If this is true, I think that there was a necessity, and I think it informs the reason or the argumentary behind the Lebanese-Israeli framework agreement. There was a necessity to probably counterbalance this optics by changing the course and the narrative and saying that ultimately Iran didn't have the ultimate or total upper hand in the region, including Lebanon. You know that one of the points that Iran made a fuss about in the ceasefire was the cessation of hostilities in Lebanon, asking even the withdrawal of Israel from occupied territory in Lebanon. I think there was a necessity for many reasons. First of all, for what the value of American power is to counterbalance this, let's say, disastrous optics of the way Iran and the US seized their war. There was a necessity probably for political reasons in the US by President Trump to give something to Netanyahu in a very dire and very sensitive electoral campaign. And I think that the electoral given has to be kept in mind from now till October in Israel. Everything is electoral now in Israel, pictures, optics, texts, etc. And this text is a very important victory electorally for Benjamin Netanyahu. And then I think lately what we can perceive, I don't know if it's true or not, and Ambassador Satterfield can weigh in, but you have also, I think, a divergence between two lines in the US administration, and we can say that to be simplest, I mean, maybe to simplify and maybe to be a bit schematic, but the US-Iran agreement is a Vance design, a J.D. Vance design, a Vice President Vance design, while the Israel-Lebanon thing is mainly a Rubio victory. So there is a sort of twist of arm between both. Now, regardless of the text itself, we'll get into it probably in the next round of questions. But for me, the problem, if Lebanon has accepted and remains a question here, a big question, what happened during the last 24 hours before the proclamation of the agreement between Lebanon and Israel? You know that the day before the text was adopted, Lebanon was very steadfast and it was still refusing most of the things that we have seen in the final text. Something happened at that moment. If Lebanon chose to go for that course, under, let's say, the argument of freeing itself completely from any other tutelage of a power, it's Iran, or a mechanism. And the ceasefire between Iran and Israel, and dissociate completely the file of Lebanon from the regional file. I think it has probably taken a risk here. It has taken the risk of finding itself without a safety net, a regional safety net. It's maybe a bold decision from quote unquote a sovereignist, let's say, approach by the Lebanese government. But I think that it could face itself in front of two alternatives that are both quite cruel. Either, and as Ambassador Satterfield said, no one is able to really deliver Hezbollah in the course of this agreement. And then the text will become a sort of dead body of something that is formal but unable to be implemented, or its implementation could be extremely costly, at least on the domestic front in Lebanon and probably on other fronts also. So I think that in sum, the core question becomes, and we're back here to if you want, to the basic question: what and who could deliver Hezbollah? I mean, who, which country, which party, but what, which process? What is the process that will deliver Hezbollah? To be simple, maybe, or maybe simplistic, the regional framework could be maybe easier to deliver Hezbollah as Iran is satisfied. It could be costless in terms of political risk. It could be costly in terms of sovereignty for Lebanon, but it's more, I would say, secure on the regional level. While the Lebanese tête-à-tête with Israel, in which this recent text puts the government of Lebanon, a very unbalanced tête-à-tête with an Israel that is dictating very harsh conditions. If you look at the text, if you look at the security annex, I mean the so-called secret annex that is not secret anymore, Israel and Lebanon are head-to-head. Lebanon is faced with Israel without much of US guarantees, if you look at the details in the text. So the cost of that face-à-face or this tête-à-tête could be very costly potentially for Lebanon, even though it could open the way for a restoration, or supposedly or hopefully for a restoration of Lebanese sovereignty. So I think that the quid pro quo is very difficult. The choice between the two policies is very difficult. I hope, and here I completely join Ambassador Satterfield, that at some point, and we'll talk about it maybe later, under certain conditions in the region, the two frameworks and the two tracks could be complementary and not opposable.
Thank you, Joe. We'll get into the details of many of the issues that you mentioned, particularly what is the process that would deliver Hezbollah, maybe also what is the process by which these two tracks can be complementary. Lina, at a high level, how would you describe the Israeli-Lebanese framework? What has Lebanon, Joe tried to describe a bit like the results or the impact. What for you has Lebanon really secured through this agreement? And what are the important issues that remain unresolved or insufficiently guaranteed in this agreement?
Thank you, and thank you to Kulluna Irada for hosting this very timely conversation and for allowing me to speak on this topic. Lebanon is struggling a sovereignty struggle, and Iran does not want that. This is the big picture. Iran sees Lebanon as a card in its hands, and that is why Iran keeps claiming that it wants full Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon before Iran agrees to further steps with the US. But in reality, we have seen Iran move on regardless. So there is a rhetorical framework that Iran is using that is addressed at its constituents in Lebanon to try to present the situation as business as usual, meaning that Lebanon will always be spoken for by Iran. This is the Iranian perspective. So what this framework does is contest that, because it is a framework that basically affirms that only Lebanon speaks on behalf of Lebanon, and that itself is important. We are seeing the Lebanese government move on in ways that both Iran and Hezbollah are publicly saying that they disagree with. And yet we are also seeing that neither Iran nor Hezbollah is really able to stand in the way of a framework agreement like this being signed. So at the level of symbolism, this is Lebanon asserting sovereignty in international diplomatic circles. But of course, this is only a framework agreement. And I know there have been a lot of disagreements in Lebanon, voiced openly in the public domain against some of the terms of the agreement. So you asked about some of the things that remain unaddressed. One key thing is that the security annex that has just been mentioned says, when it comes to the issue of supervision and dispute resolution, that there will be US facilitation to conduct a periodic review of the implementation of the annex. So no, we are not seeing Lebanon and Israel left on their own to handle things. There are actually guarantees, even though they're not articulated as guarantees, but they are guarantees that only the US can offer, that will be there as part of the implementation. And the second thing that the annex says is that it could be revised. So if there are any disagreements, if there are any things that need changing, the agreement allows everyone involved to actually change the terms further down the line. So this gives Lebanon a lot more flexibility to be adaptable, to be able to maneuver around both Israel and Iran. So I feel that, yes, this may look like an imperfect agreement to many, but it's a step in the right direction for the two reasons that I mentioned. And I'll talk about the details again later.
Thank you, Lina. David, the framework envisages a phased sequence, right, in which the Lebanese armed forces deploy to designated areas, dismantle Hezbollah's infrastructure, and then establish exclusive state control, while reconstruction, the return of displaced communities, and Israeli withdrawal will then proceed in response to this verified implementation of what is called the pilot zones, right, in this sequencing. So do you believe that this sequencing that is proposed in the framework is operationally and politically workable? And what safeguards would prevent either side from delaying the process indefinitely?
Let me say I agree with the remarks Joe and Lina have made. But I'll go back to a fundamental framing comment about what we have witnessed here. This agreement is indeed a step in the right direction. And for all of my very, very serious reservations about the implementation, it is absolutely the right first step. President Aoun and his government deserve credit for what they have done. It's a gamble. It's a risk. They are betting on the expectation that they will have both regional support and President Trump's support as this goes forward with respect to Israel. However, the dominant player here is not Lebanon. It is Iran. The necessity of this MOU with Israel was driven by the need to find some means of constraining Israeli actions in Lebanon, which, like the Israeli strike last September in Doha, like other Israeli steps, have placed in jeopardy any ability of Trump to bring an end to the Iran conflict that produces an opening of the Strait of Hormuz. That's it. That's the driver. That's the engine here. Lebanon is moving along in that train. But let's do the best we can, given that framing, to try to see this move forward. Now, no progress will be made. Zero. None. Indeed, the struggle will be to avoid negative developments from Israel during this electoral campaign. Famously, Israel has been said to have no foreign policy, only domestic policy. There's a lot of truth to that. The president is struggling, clearly, to constrain Netanyahu's behavior. Defense Minister Katz is extraordinarily belligerent, addressing virtually every state in the region, but particularly Lebanon, Syria, Iran. The president, our president, is trying to constrain that. This MOU is designed to provide a framework for such constraint. It will require continuous presidential pressure. Witkoff and Jared can't do it alone. The president will have to rein in Bibi. All of Bibi's political instincts will be to attack, to show that he is not constrained by Trump or any other party in all of this. So we've got a challenging period from now through the Israeli election, likely in the latter part of October, and while a new government is being established here. But it is a good first step. But your question, Diana, can the provisions in the security annex for the four-step process be implemented? No, they can't. And I believe it's understood they can't be. This was a device to try to avoid a worse outcome, which would affect the Iran negotiations. But knowing that, let's try to see what could be done. And if I were leading the negotiations, my next step here would not be the endless focus on the pilot zones and the LAF. It would be to resolve the blue line points of disagreement, to agree upon an international border, which is not what the blue line is. That's the Resolution 425 implementation line that I drew. But to draw a sovereign border, that can be produced without Hezbollah. The issues are very, very small. They will require the president's intense pressure. A few square kilometers are literally the end of the world for the government of Israel, but it can be done. You produce a border now that's agreed by both sides. You've taken away another one of Hezbollah's justifications for the campaign. So, no, I don't think the disarmament steps can be implemented, but I do see other positive steps that can be taken in the time ahead. And I know there is regional support for all of this, unlike the May 17 agreement.
So just to recap on two main points maybe that you brought up. The first is there's a lot of, betting on regional support and international support in order to rein Israel in, particularly before the October elections. That is one.
Diana, the regional and the international support is not critical to, quote, rein in Israel. That is only something which Donald Trump can do. It is to support the government of Lebanon, to provide an Arab endorsement for what the risks the government of Lebanon is taking. That's the new feature here, which is very important.
And this, so first, U.S. support to rein in Israel, U.S. and Arab support to the trajectory and the choices that the Lebanese government has made. And also, in the meantime, what you believe is meaningful progress is some kind of at least demarcation or agreement on the points of disagreement today along the blue line.
Lina, it is the further steps beyond this MOU to minimize Hezbollah's legitimacy, its claim to be representing the liberation of Lebanon. Great. There are some steps that can't be taken under this Israeli government. There are others that can be. I'm focused on what is doable now.
Great. Joe, will this be sufficient for the Lebanese government to maintain its legitimacy? And will this be sufficient for the Lebanese government to be able to tell the Lebanese, listen, this is what we're able to achieve in the coming 5-6 months?
This question brings us back to the core question that David Satterfield is raising. Can the LAF alone, or can the LAF with the support of American forces or Arab forces or etc., or can Israel alone deliver Hezbollah by force, or is Hezbollah to be delivered by a political process? This is the question. And in the latter question is the role of Iran, its quote-unquote satisfaction on the regional level. Let me weigh in or zoom in on these famous pilot zones where I think, or in this very famous now secret annex that is no more secret anymore. And the question is, who leaked it and why? This is a very interesting question. I think it has been probably leaked to embarrass a little bit the Lebanese government, probably because its secrecy was a question, was a request by the Lebanese government itself. But if you look at the details, and here probably I would maybe, I don't want to get into a tit-and-tat, but with Lina, no, the text is not so much balanced, Lina. When you look at it, you have something, I mean, you have some provisions that are really puzzling. For example, the LAF that will operate in the pilot zones will have first to be completely revamped and vetted by a joint committee between the US CENTCOM and the Lebanese army, which means that we are heading towards not only technical, let's face it, but a political uplifting or lift up of the Lebanese army. And this is, you know, in Lebanon, a huge venture. It will trigger a lot of things. It will mean things on the political level in Lebanon, on the sectarian level, etc., etc. This is one. Second, this LAF that has to act in the pilot zones. And here, nota bene, I forgot to say, already Lebanon made a huge concession towards itself, I mean, towards its own request. If you remember the day before, this is why I said something happened in the last 24 hours. The day before, Lebanon was refusing that the pilot zones are not both in the occupied territory, within the yellow zone. Now it has accepted that one of them is north of the Litani. That has nothing to do with an Israeli withdrawal, meaning that Lebanese withdrawal, Israeli withdrawal and Lebanese sovereignty is completely dissociated in this pilot zone, at least from the other process. But I close the parenthesis here. The vetting, so the Lebanese army has to act in this pilot zone south of the Litani. And if you notice, there is something that has gone almost unnoticed. There is the creation of a, I'm quoting, military coordination group for Lebanon, in which only Israel and Lebanon military forces are sitting, meaning that it is up to Israel to grant you the certificate, to grant the Lebanese army the certificate that it has done the job the way the Israeli army sees it. It's not a third party that grants this certificate. And only this will entail or engage an Israeli withdrawal, meaning that if I want to use a metaphor or a comparison, I think it's very much resemblant to the ceasefire agreement and the process of the surveillance of the ceasefire in Gaza. It puts a question of sequencing that is almost impossible to solve. It renders the confidence-building measures by both sides almost impossible to mount and to be accepted, especially if one or two of the belligerents are in bad faith. And we know that today, for electoral reasons, Israel is in bad faith in the implementation of this agreement. It means that ultimately, we are back to square one. We are back a little bit to the same conundrum and the same stalemate in which we were in November 2024 with the cessation of hostility. It's up to the Lebanese army to dismantle Hezbollah's infrastructure. If not, Israel then does not withdraw or resumes its strikes. Now it doesn't withdraw. I think that in that context, if you agree with me, if you agree with this lecture, with this reading, and in realistic terms, if the Lebanese army will not also, or the Lebanese government will not also trigger another provision in the text, in the framework of agreement, which is very interesting. The Lebanese government has the right to call upon Arab and international forces to help it implement the mission. Okay, let's assume it does. We get into something that David Satterfield had mentioned, something a la 83, 84, etc., multinational force. If it doesn't, it means it's unable to dismantle Hezbollah's forces, and we're back to status quo. If we agree on that framework, I think that in the best case, the south of the Litani will be back, and David Satterfield mentioned the period. I think it's very interesting. We're back to something that will resemble the April understanding of 1996, meaning that Hezbollah will say Israel is still in the south. Israel will say the Lebanese army is unable to disarm Hezbollah in the south of the Litani. We are entitled legitimately, according to the text, to go on a tit-and-tat militarily under a ceiling which is probably framed by something that we haven't mentioned, which is at the core of the Iran-US agreement, which is the creation of the deconfliction cell on Lebanon that includes Iran, Pakistan, Qatar, and the US. So I think that we are framing, in fact, a sort of closed arena of confrontation in the south of the Litani in the best of case. In the worst of case, of course, Netanyahu is unhinged. He wins election. Trump is unable to rein him in, and the war will resume, especially if the ceasefire between Iran and the US unravels. So I think that this is, in a nutshell, this is the realistic scenario for this text.
Thank you, Joe. I want to understand later on from you what you think the difference will be between the deconfliction cell and the new mechanism that's
exactly. But this is a huge question, Lina, Diana, because the deconfliction cell is a Vance device that has been planted in the US-Iranian ceasefire, while the military coordination group for Lebanon between Israel and the LAF, I repeat again, it's only them in tete-a-tete, in face-à-face. Can you imagine the imbalance of the situation between these two actors? Is something that has been planted in the Lebanese-Israeli agreement. So we have something that is potentially a collision course here. And again, as David Satterfield has said, only this, if we can take it, is a card given to Iran in order to try to derail the process.
Thank you, Joe. Lina, I want to build on David and Joe's comments and ask you maybe what, in your opinion, would meaningful progress for Lebanon look like over the next 6 months? What could we consider as meaningful progress? What are the specific benchmarks that can be used to determine whether this framework has really allowed Lebanon to restore its sovereignty or to put it on its way of restoring its sovereignty?
Okay, well, let me just, I guess, take this opportunity to explain some things that I think may or have been modeled a little bit in the discussion. When we talk about the section of the annex that mentions the military coordination group for Lebanon, which, as Joe said, is established according to the annex by Lebanon and Israel, actually the reporting of this cell, according to the annex, happens through indirect military channels between Lebanon and Israel. So when we say indirect military channels, it means there is a third party. And so, again, this is a framework agreement. This is not a full-fledged agreement with details. This is just the big picture. So there are things that are unsaid, but as I explained earlier about the US role, the US role is really there in every single part of this agreement. And so it's not going to be Israel setting the agenda and Lebanon following. It's going to be the US coordinating between Lebanon and Israel. Now, I want to address some issues that I think are a bit perhaps sensitive, because I see a lot of criticism, as I said, about this annex and the agreement amongst many Lebanese in particular commentators. One issue is regarding basically the question of Israeli redeployment. This is a huge one because a lot of people are interpreting this as allowing Israel to stay within Lebanon as an occupying force. And that is not what this agreement is actually saying. So we have to think about the big picture of sequencing. We are now talking about sequencing of implementing the terms in terms of the pilot zones, etc. But the big sequencing has to do with Iran and Israel and the US. Because ultimately, Hezbollah only answers to Iran. It would be completely unrealistic to expect Hezbollah to take a track that is separate from what Tehran wants. So for me, my reading is that what this framework agreement is doing is present a path for long-term engagement between Lebanon and Israel. But for this path to result in stability, first, we have to see change in Tehran. And so, yes, Lebanon speaks on behalf of Lebanon, but Iran speaks on behalf of Hezbollah. these are two very separate things. What Iran's trying to do, as I said, is pretend that Iran speaks on behalf of Lebanon. So if we understand that, then we see that when Iran is under enough pressure by the US to feel that it has to modify its behavior in the region one way or another, or when disagreements within the Iranian regime result in some sort of implosion of this regime, this is when the situation in Lebanon regarding Hezbollah will shift. And this is when the Lebanese army will be able to deploy, etc. And this is when Israel will no longer have an excuse to say we need to occupy parts of Lebanon to protect Israel's security. And so if we accept that the sequencing needs to start with big change in Iran regarding Hezbollah, and that this agreement is about how Lebanon manages its relationship with Israel, then I think we can start seeing that the redeployment of Israeli troops is about the security zone that will be on the border between Lebanon and Israel, which is what this CEL, the military coordination group, is about. It's about managing security between those two countries. And if this is a joint security agreement, then any presence of Israel on that border will have to be done through a joint agreement between Israel and Lebanon and the US. And therefore, this presence, this redeployment is no longer occupation, it's a security agreement presence. So this is very different. And this is not about occupying huge parts of Lebanon, occupying villages, removing civilians from where they need to live. No, this will be certain security points that would be, as I said, mutually agreed. So the picture is not as gloomy as a lot of people may think. So yeah, so for me, this is, talking about the next 6 months while zooming in just on this agreement, I think misses the big picture that I just talked about, which means that we may need quite a bit longer than that unless the situation between the US and Iran moves on in the way that I talked about. Thank you.
Thank you, Lina. David, if the commitments made by Lebanon through this bilateral framework conflict with the understanding reached between Washington and Tehran, which track is likely to prevail? And how can Lebanon preserve agency over the decisions that are affecting it in this case?
The Iran track, to put it more accurately, the Iran-US negotiations over the Strait of Hormuz are the single priority here. Everything else is secondary or tertiary. Lebanon cannot retain agency except as a product of steps that are needed, either with respect to Lebanese actions or Israeli actions, to preserve, facilitate, mitigate harm to the Iran track. That is the game in town here. But let me take Lina's comments and Joe's excellent remarks, which I could not endorse more strongly. What can we expect over the next 3 to 6 months? What I hope for is mitigation of harm, that is to avoid worse outcomes in terms of provocative Israeli politically driven decisions, to bolster, buck up the government of Lebanon in the face of Hezbollah's attacks. I certainly hope for both of those. And again, on the positive side, I do hope an additional step like a border delineation, which will help the government of Lebanon. That can be done. But at the end of the day here, Joe, you laid it out, I think, very accurately. In a best case, which will not be achieved while this government of Israel is present, full stop. But in a best case, you go back to something like the April understandings of 1996, in which there is an understanding Israel has the right to defend itself against attacks, but that it does not occupy although it certainly did in 96. It does not occupy Lebanese territory. And that means the 5 hilltop posts as well. There has to be a complete Israeli withdrawal. You can do that in the context of an agreed international border. You can do it without that. But that's the best case I see over the next year that's possible here. I do not see any broader military resolution to Hezbollah. Again, quoting Joe, that's a political issue. And it will involve ultimate changes in Tehran, which we cannot predict at this point on timeline, not kinetic activity, either by the LAF or by Israel.
What is a scenario by which you believe Hezbollah can be disarmed?
I just said the only scenario
yes,
is a
through Iran, but how?
Is a political one in which Hezbollah no longer has.
So it's a political agreement with Tehran.
It will require Tehran's position to change fundamentally. And I cannot predict when that happens because I believe Hezbollah is intrinsic to the Iranian ideological core that shapes, that norms the regime in Tehran, the regime in Iran.
Great. Thank you, David. Joe, on the issue of, the Lebanese internal domestic politics, Hezbollah has rejected the framework. Other domestic political actors, Nabil Berri, Walid Jumblat, have also challenged its legitimacy and warned, and some have even threatened of internal conflict. How, in your opinion, can the Lebanese state move forward given these challenges? And are you concerned that the Lebanese government might get overthrown?
I think it's very premature to go to that. I think to that extreme. I think that both. All the opponents to the agreements or the skeptics towards the agreement are first of all very wary of entering into a spiral that could not be controlled, that could take the country to something that is really uncontrollable. But also, I think, and let's be a bit cynical here, I think that they are also very aware of what Ambassador Satterfield and maybe a little bit myself are saying, that this is partly a sort of, I would say, sideshow besides what's happening between Iran and the US. And it's something like a sort of electoral, I would say, episode within the Israeli political life and probably the pre-midterm in the US. So I don't think they will rush to their weapons and close Beirut tomorrow and etc. Even the political process, if we are to believe what we are reading today in the press from Speaker Berri, even him is taking some, let's say, slow steps, and they have time. To arrive to that stage. The question is, I think, and here I'll probably prolong what you were discussing with David Satterfield a little bit. Back to my question: what is the process that could deliver or untie the knot of Hezbollah? Let's not focus only on this question of weapons, dismantlement of the military. What will untie the knot of Hezbollah in Lebanon? We have two roads here, two avenues possible. One is a military eradication. Okay, Israel has tried it. The Lebanese army will probably not try it. And if it will try it, it will lead the country to something I don't want to imagine. You have a political process that is both Lebanese and regional. And here we get back to the framework of our discussion. Let me remind you of something. The 2 days after the announcement of the Iranian-American understanding in Islamabad, Saudi Arabia and other countries like Turkey, Pakistan, Qatar, even France and others took advanced steps towards the Lebanese question by saying, okay, if there is a regional umbrella that will de-escalate the conflict in the region, we are ready to work on certain formats and processes in order to demobilize, integrate Hezbollah in a peaceful, gradual, incremental manner in the country with the agreement of Iran. Now, of course, I know that this could raise smiles, eyebrows, irony. Okay, I'm not getting into that debate. I don't, frankly, this is not my stuff. And then we had, after that, okay, Very interesting statements by, I'm bringing a new actor here. Very interesting statements by Ahmad Shara in Syria saying, I am fully ready not only not to intervene in Lebanon after Donald Trump has told him to intervene, but I'm ready to work on the facilitation of the integration of Hezbollah in a political process, even going as far as saying I'm ready to have a negotiation and a dialogue with Hezbollah from someone who has blood between him and Hezbollah. So this is enormous. Okay, so let me back to my rationale. I think that we are faced with two ways or with two tracks. Either we go alone in a tete-a-tete with Israel under the tutelage or the auspices of a US that we all know has very short bandwidth and breadth, okay? And I think David Satterfield said it, and Trump will not be here to enter into the nitty-gritty details of that between Lebanon and Israel. We are faced with this track. Lebanon has to take its responsibility. It has to take its choices. The Lebanese army has to be reshuffled and revamped. It has to work under an umbrella of international and Arab forces. I don't know if they will exist, that all are ready to go after Hezbollah to dismantle its military infrastructure. This is one scenario. Frankly, today, I don't see it happening. The other scenario is you have a regional process that is going on if the ceasefire holds between Iran and the US, and then the regional framework with a sort of courroie de transmission, as we say, a sort of mechanism of transmission between Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Syria, works on a sort of Lebanese dialogue under a regional umbrella that will alone solve the question of Hezbollah, including its weapons. But the weapons are not the only issue. There is the integration, the demobilization, probably the revision, we like it or not, also of parts of the political system and the political equilibrium. Only this will bring probably the question to a peaceful end. I think, and maybe I'm betting here, I'm stopping here, I'm betting that somewhere, I think that Iran and Hezbollah could be ready to accept such a process.
Thank you, Joe. The point that you make also on the regional actors is very interesting and important. And I think it would be very important for us to monitor the positions of this new Saudi, Turkish, Pakistani, and Egyptian alignment, and even
French, maybe.
Yeah. Yes, in the region, in order for us to try to see also how they will be positioned and what kind of role they can play vis-a-vis Lebanon and particularly Hezbollah's disarmament. Lina, I'm going to end this with you, and then we're going to open the room for Q&A. We're already more than 90 people on the call, and we already have more than 15 questions in the Q&A. So I want to ask the panelists, please, to really answer every question in 2 minutes so that we can have the time to answer everyone. Lina, Joe said that Hezbollah is not only the arms, right? And we've heard that repeatedly, and we know that. What he said it in order to actually explain that there's an entire process that has to happen inside of Lebanon in order to try to integrate, to demobilize basically first and then to integrate. But also, don't you think, and he mentioned that he doesn't think that the Lebanese armed forces can really disarm Hezbollah realistically today.
At least in their present form.
In their present form. But don't you think that there is something that can be done in the interim? First, many military analysts have mentioned that there could be some kind of gradual, demilitarization of some areas on behalf of the LAF. Is this possible? And two, are there other things that the Lebanese government can do with regards to Hezbollah's control over state institutions, Hezbollah's clientelistic network, Hezbollah's financial and illicit financing networks? Is there something that can be done in that regard?
Yes. One of the most important aspects of this issue is the domestic situation in Lebanon, and it's not just about security. One thing is, I think a lot of Lebanese, unfortunately, who are sympathetic to Hezbollah, do not trust the Lebanese government. And this is because Hezbollah and Iran have cultivated this mistrust for decades, because they, capitalize on it, manipulate it. And so this is why, if you tell a lot of these people who are skeptics, the Lebanese army is going to deploy in the south, they say, but we do not trust it. We do not trust that it will protect us from Israel. So the issue of trust, I think, is something that the Lebanese government should address, and not just in a security framework. It has to also be through working with leaders from this community, especially the people who come from Hezbollah's constituents, collaboration with key figures in the community, civil society, coordination with municipalities. There are a lot of things that need to happen alongside the security track. And when it comes to the security track, the deployment of the Lebanese army in the south or anywhere should be done under the framework of national defense, not Hezbollah disarmament. Because when you say Hezbollah disarmament, a lot of these skeptics see this as serving Israel's interests. Whereas if the army is deployed for national defense, I don't think, anyone in Lebanon would be against the army basically doing its natural role. But when they say we don't trust it because its capacity is, not up to the desired level, for example, or because we don't know whether it will actually defend Lebanon, this is when you need the capacity building and monitoring offered by the international community. Let's not forget that the UNIFIL mandate is about to end. France and Italy have already expressed interest in being involved in some sort of post-UNIFIL process. I say, let's start that process now. Let's have this international force be there alongside the army so that there is a handover from UNIFIL to this international presence that supports national defense in Lebanon. So if you work on these tracks simultaneously, you will see that this framework agreement that we're discussing today is only tackling one angle of a very complicated picture.
Thank you, Lina. A very interesting point you made about the role of the state and the importance of the state, particularly in actually rebuilding, and the importance of rebuilding Lebanese people's trust in the Lebanese state. And I think here also what's important is for the state to actually play its role in providing services and in supporting the communities that were, or all the Lebanese were affected by the war, and the importance of actually getting international financial support during this period, because it will boost up the credibility of the state and its role significantly. And a small follow-up question for you, because you discussed this, are you concerned that the unfreezing of Iranian assets will actually shore up Hezbollah's clientelistic network in Lebanon again?
No, not necessarily, because Hezbollah is now facing difficulty in getting money from Iran. Syria, for example, used to be a porous border through which Hezbollah got a lot of resources. Hezbollah used to control the port and the airport in Lebanon. This is all changing in a positive sense, because we're seeing a restoration of state authority. Now, of course, you mentioned earlier also that there is still infiltration of state institutions, etc., etc. So we're not talking about a scenario in which all those problems suddenly disappear. But certainly the ability of Hezbollah to maneuver is being constrained more and more, with more US sanctions, for example. Even regional countries having to be more compliant with anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism measures led by the US. So the big picture is shifting. And so, yeah, if the money goes to Iran, it's not necessarily the case that it'll be able to actually deploy it to Hezbollah.
Thank you. I'll move to the Q&A. The first question is to you, David, I believe. How can the Lebanese state trust the Trump administration while Congress has reduced military aid to the Lebanese army and Mr. Trump wants Al-Qaeda in Syria, now a US ally, to intervene in Lebanon? How can the Trump administration expect the Lebanese army to disarm Hezbollah with fewer resources?
Well, there are several parts to that question. The first is it is not a question of trust. It's a question of what's the alternative. There would be no MOU. Partial, difficult, if not extremely hard to ever implement fully, constraining of Lebanon, giving Israel a unbalanced position in determining whether progress is made. All that's true. But there would be no MOU at all if it were not for the president's and the U.S. engagement. That MOU is not driven by concern for Lebanon. It is driven by Iran. But okay, let's take the world as we find it and try to make the best of it. So I don't talk about trust here. I talk about the alternative, which is unconstrained Israeli activity, not just in the south, but elsewhere in Lebanon, which will enhance Hezbollah's role, diminish the credibility of this exceptional government of Lebanon we have right now, all to the benefit of Iran and to the benefit of Hezbollah. So yes, I am concerned about constraints on funding to the LAF, of course, but I do not see any practical alternative right now that benefits Lebanon and the Lebanese other than playing out over time, which is beyond October and the elections in Israel, this current framework.
Thank you. A follow-up to that, how can the Lebanese people, including Lebanese American voters, trust that the Trump administration is acting in the interests of Lebanon? I think you've already addressed that and answered it in your previous answer.
Yeah, but I'll be very clear here. The government of the United States does not act on behalf of the interests of a foreign country. It acts on behalf of the government's interests and what it assesses to be the interests of American people, as well as the supporters of the party or the president in power. So let's be clear about this.
Thank you. There's also a question, maybe Joe, you can take that. Why won't the US administration use any leverage with Israel? Can you describe the role of the pro-Israel lobby in framing US foreign policy in the Middle East?
Yeah, very quickly.
Go ahead.
The role of the so-called Israeli lobby, I put that in quote marks, is minimal right now, as is clear from commentary throughout the American political press and politicians. What is driving the U.S. administration, which means the president? Iran, and also Iran, and opening the strait, keeping it open, and the impact of failure to do that or success on the markets.
Thank you. Question to Joe. While the Lebanese-Israel framework isn't being treated as a treaty that needs to be ratified by Parliament, what's the likelihood that Speaker Berre would stage a parliamentary vote to topple the agreement through constitutional means?
This is the part that is still unclear until this hour. I think even within the government and around the prime minister and in the presidency, there is a debate on the legal status of the text. What is sure, I mean, let me put it that way. So far, the negotiations were held under provision 53 of the Constitution, granting the President of the Republic the constitutional right to engage negotiations and then win consultation with the Prime Minister and putting the Council of Ministers in the picture. This is the text of Article 53. Yeah. After that, now, there is a debate on the status and the value of this framework agreement. As Lina said, it's not a final agreement, so it's not a treaty. It doesn't have to go to Parliament obligatorily. However, it has now, especially after the Council of Ministers in its last session, Diana, has itself constrained itself in a way by saying that the last round of negotiation is happening under the direct let's say, directive of the government united, meaning that the text has now to go through the Council of Ministers in order to get vote. And here it's a tricky issue. I don't want to get now into the political arithmetics, but if you take the composition of the Council of Ministers and I would say the reservations that you yourself have mentioned, meaning Amal, Hezbollah, the ministers of Walid Jumblat, and part of the ministers who are in between all these forces, I think it will be very difficult to find 2/3 of the votes within the Council of Ministers to approve that text. What will be the parade that President Nawaf Salam will find to that? I don't know. President Berry or Speaker Berry has said today that he is reserving himself the right to take this text to Parliament. I don't know how constitutionally, but he can find a loophole. So I think that we're in the middle of something that is murky. It will take time without disclosing all sources and etc. I saw yesterday, for example, an MP in the Jumblat bloc, and he was saying that he hopes that the text will not go to the Council of Ministers because it will be voted against.
Interesting. Thank you, Joe. Another question. How do you rate the communication of the Lebanese government to sell the agreement? Lina, maybe you can take this. How do you rate the communication of the Lebanese government to sell the agreement to the population, in particular the displaced?
As I was saying, I think the government needs to do a lot more domestically. There's been so much focus on foreign relations and security that I'm afraid the domestic trust question is not being addressed enough. I think any people anywhere in any country in the world want to feel that they are part of the decision making for their nation. And I think in Lebanon, we have a lot to do regarding nation building. And this was even before, this whole war began. And so I think the government needs to, have more of a presence in non-security circles to try to address the concerns of the displaced. One key question, which is very sensitive, is that a lot of the displaced are from the Shia community. And the majority of the Shia community have, for decades, mainly had Hezbollah as their political voice in Lebanon. And so a lot of them are fearing what would happen if Hezbollah disappears, not because they necessarily love Hezbollah for what it is, but because they fear losing their political voice. So that issue definitely needs addressing.
Thank you. And also, okay, go ahead, Joe, and then I want to...
Yeah, I would add on that. I think something extremely important that the government is lacking, action on and is really in deficit. I think it should address probably the most fragile part of the constituency in Lebanon that is concerned by this process as such, and by the war, which are the displaced people. I think that they are the main ones that are entitled to know where we are heading, if they are going to find again their villages, who will going to reconstruct them, and if they will be able to live in peace in the coming decades in the south. And I think that this is a target that the government could gain easily and could, I would say, peel off Hezbollah gradually. Unfortunately, it's not doing enough on that front.
Yes, more needs to be done in terms of communication. Philippe Yared, I hope you got the answer to your question. A question to David, before I move back to you, Lina. A question to David. The Lebanese borders are already acknowledged by the UN. Why do we need to negotiate them every other invasion? And does the Lebanese have any...
Sure. Quick answer. The president of the Security Council in the summer of 2000 issued a statement on behalf of the council determining that Israel had withdrawn to the border or the line determined by UN Security Council Resolution 425. That is the so-called blue line that Tarja Larsen and I drew in June of 2000. That is not an international border. It is an implementation line for a UN Security Council resolution. There are several points which are not resolved between 7 and 9 within any determination of a true international border. The majority of it coincides with the blue line. But yes, a negotiation is absolutely required, is sought by the government of Lebanon to close those remaining areas, which are quite small. They do not include the Sheba farms. The out there is not an issue for Israel-Lebanon negotiations, but rather negotiations with Syria. But it does require a negotiation to be concluded bilaterally between the two states.
Thank you, David. Lina, it's apparent to most observers that Israel is treating Lebanon like Palestine. How can a sovereign Lebanese government not see that, which is unacceptable to the majority of Lebanese?
There are, of course, many parallels that are so obvious in terms of occupation, depopulation, definitely. But I disagree that the Lebanese government does not see that. In fact, it is because it sees that it is engaging in these negotiations. Because over the years, the Arabs in general tried to destroy Israel. Let's be very clear. What was 1948? 1967, 1973, all those wars had Arab countries basically try to say we're going to negate the existence of the state of Israel. None of those wars resulted in that outcome. And here we have a state of Israel that is internationally recognized, and Arab countries have had to adapt one way or another. Now, some have, of course, went as far as normalization. Others are discussing other potential agreements, and others, of course, regard Israel as an enemy. Lebanon's destiny is that it is next door to Israel. So it has to manage the situation one way or another. And if anything, I think the Lebanese government has learned from the experience of Palestinian negotiations with Israel. And so I think, no, on the contrary, we are, as Lebanon, being quite pragmatic in dealing with this overall picture and dealing with a reality that, may not be palatable to some or many, but it is a reality.
Okay. Thank you. David, the Israeli PM has just formally confirmed that his country and Lebanon want to live in peace. Would this be possible soon? Question from George Saada.
Well, the answer is, as we have all three of us been discussing all along, we have no doubt that it is the desire, the intent of the government of Lebanon. And I would add to that, I don't believe for a moment that Nabih Berri or Walid Jumblat oppose that goal. But each of them are constrained both politically and in a security sense because of Hezbollah in what they can say at any given moment. So let's be clear. There's a consensus here for peace. Can it be achieved now? I think steps need to be taken that bolster the government of Lebanon, that marginalize Hezbollah, not through forcible disarmament, but rather through political delegitimization. And that includes what Lina talked to, the need to move further to assist the Shia community, particularly the displaced. Hezbollah should not, and the Jihad al-Binah, be the sole supporters of life in the south, in the Bekaa. But a peace, a formal peace, I think it is politically doable, but Hezbollah must not be in a position to block. And I don't see that blockage being eliminated in the immediate future. So take the steps you can.
Thank you. Maybe Joe can answer this. What are the chances the US will veto the post-UNIFIL presence?
I saw the question, but no, there's no, the issue is not a veto or not, because the UNIFIL mandate is ending in October, November, without any chance of being renewed. It was written in the last renewal last year. So UNIFIL is over. The US has not to veto it. The question is, and the real question, and it's a very serious question, what will replace post-UNIFIL? I mean, what will be the post-UNIFIL southern landscape? We have several scenarios. First of all, the US is not fond, Israel is not fond of the UNIFIL, we know it. Hezbollah would have liked to keep a minimal UNIFIL, but it's now too late and it's undoable. I think we're heading towards one or two scenarios. The preferred American scenario, maybe David Satterfield can confirm or not, is something like the Gaza deployment force. I mean, something like an international force under something resembling a board of peace and etc. That would be a multinational force, a little bit aggressive, quote unquote, towards Hezbollah, etc., playing more on the side of the Israeli desiderata in the south. This is one scenario. I think this could not pass probably in the UN framework. It will be vetoed by Russia, by China, by other actors. There are other talks that are extremely realistic today, that probably UNIFIL will be replaced by a UNIFIL 2.0 that is mainly European, mainly Italian and French. And you've seen the recent statement by President Macron and the Prime Minister Meloni lately. They are ready to, I would say, to dress the actual UNIFIL with other clauses and remain in the south in a framework that would be more bilateral between Lebanon and these forces under an American acceptation. This is, I think, the most realistic part. Let me add something extremely important regarding UNIFIL. We tend to consider and to regard UNIFIL as only a peacekeeping force. UNIFIL has been in the south of Lebanon since 1978. It means that 2 or 3 generations of Southerners have grown up in the shadows of UNIFIL. UNIFIL is an entire sociological system in the south. It's an ecosystem. It's an economic and social, I would say, safety net. It makes thousands and tens of thousands of people live in the south of the Litani. And I think that even this aspect has to be taken into consideration in any framework that would replace UNIFIL with something else. You have to take into account that these people have melted and really blended in the southern population. And this will be a huge change to have something else or a mission of a different nature.
Thank you, Joe.
Diana, quick comment here.
Yeah.
Following on Joe's remarks, there are indeed proposals for a force of perhaps 1,200, 1,300, primarily European forces with a small political civilian component to it. It's driven both by practical concerns about creating a vacuum, but also by political domestic interests in Rome and in Paris about not losing either the prestige or the mission civilisatrice of France in Lebanon. But those are only proposals. There are positives to that, but I do not see the government of Israel accepting that in the present electoral climate in Israel. But yes, they're absolutely out there.
A question, maybe Lina, you can take this. A question by Saeed Aboudi. How can Lebanon accept the Article 13 in the framework, basically, which says the cessation of all hostile or negative actions within international, political, or legal forums? This means all war crimes are forgotten and forgiven.
Yeah, I know this is very controversial. What's also controversial is that when it comes to 2006, 2023, and March 2nd of this year, it was the Lebanese side that initiated attacks on Israel, which means that Israel could take Lebanon to courts for these attacks. And so it really goes both ways. The clause in the current agreement, as I said, this is not the final agreement. This is meant to be, I think, more of an appeasement to the Israeli side right now. But at the same time, unfortunately, it also shows tacit acceptance by the Lebanese side that Lebanon would be seen as a culprit as well and could be subjected to sanctions because of Hezbollah's actions against Israel, that in international law would be regarded as aggression. So it is a really delicate situation. all I can say is that let's not forget that this is an interim text. It's not the final one. Further down the line, I'm hoping something more equitable will be finally agreed.
Thank you. A question by Edmond Chidia. Maybe Joe, you can take this. The United States and Lebanon are working together to financially suffocate Hezbollah. Can this process weaken Hezbollah and in the long term make it easier to bring it under control?
I mean, indeed, this is the aim of these actions. I mean, it has started with the actions against Qard al-Hassan that is probably now taking a new dynamics. It is specified in the text, and it answers the question that you asked Lina before. The framework agreement, there is a clause that is very specifically saying that no money can be channeled to a non-state actor. It doesn't mention, of course, Hezbollah. Now it remains to see, and here we are again fully in the dynamics of, let's say, the interaction between the two tracks, the US-Iran track and the Lebanon-Israel track. If the former one goes, I would say, hotly and really progresses, I frankly don't see the US really curtailing the channel of some kind of help to Lebanon by Iran. I think it will be very difficult to monitor unless it is really taking illicit ways. But these are things that are left to subsequent developments. But I think that, yes, of course, when we talk about the demobilization of Hezbollah in general, beyond the weapons, the financial aspect is a crucial one. It has to do with Iran, of course, but the financial channels and circuits of Hezbollah are not only related to Iran. Hezbollah has its own economy. It has its own, I would say, micro credit system. It has financing from abroad that is coming from outside Iran. We also have to see, and this is something we are starting to work on at the Institute, also the channels that today are developing between Syria and Lebanon that could directly or indirectly also help this actor to continue living.
Thank you, Joe. I think we've covered all the questions. There's only one comment from Geneva Ferguson, basically saying political requires Hezbollah at the table of negotiation. Any comment on that, David? Maybe you can comment on that. Do you agree? Do you disagree?
Hezbollah, of course, is at the table in a very real sense through Iran. To bring Hezbollah as its own, quote, independent, close quote, actor to the negotiating table would give it a further legitimacy, which is not in the interests of Lebanon or the region as a whole. But one should have no doubt Hezbollah is intimately involved, intrinsically connected to the Iranian regime's positioning. And look, at the end of the day, we talk about the instrumentalization of Lebanon by Iran to advance its own goals. If Iran believes at any point that Hezbollah must be given specific instructions on what to do or not to do, Tehran will not hesitate to take such a step. So yes, there is no need, nor should there be an interest in separate representation.
Thank you. There's also another question about Article 13. Does anyone want to comment further on this article? I mean, Lina has commented. Okay. Thank you. I think we're done with the Q&A. So just maybe each of the panelists in 1 minute can just tell us a final concluding remark. For me, I'd like you to answer one question. If you were the president / the prime minister of Lebanon, what would your priorities be for the next 5 to 6 months? Yalla, Joe, start in 1 minute.
I would take the easy road. I would say he has to do everything in his power to build domestic consensus towards what's coming. And what's coming is far from being simple in the region and in Lebanon.
Thank you. David, you've already mentioned the border demarcation. You've already mentioned the need for the government to stand strong or like to stay strong politically facing the developments. What else?
The government of Lebanon must do everything in its power beyond the points already noted to retain the attention, engagement of Donald Trump and his senior negotiators. If he loses that, if he places himself crosswise with the president, there really is no hopeful course here.
Thank you. Lina.
In addition to all this, let's not forget the regional Arab dimension, which is so important. I know that countries in the Gulf want to support Lebanon when it comes to reconstruction. They want to offer economic alternatives to people who currently see Hezbollah as their only lifeline. But that requires a package of coordination between Lebanon and the Gulf. So let's not forget our Gulf friends.
Thank you. And with that, we wrap up our webinar for this evening or this morning for you who are joining from the US. I want to thank again the panelists for joining us, David, Joseph, and Lina. Thank you very much. It was a very interesting discussion. I also want to thank all the attendees for making it to this discussion, and hopefully more to come. Thank you very much.